Welcome, mystery lovers. In this story, we step into the world of Tommy and Tuppence, a pair whose wit and courage have made them unforgettable. Tell us where in the world you're listening from. It's always a joy to see how far these mysteries travel. If you enjoy these mysteries, don't forget to like and subscribe. Your support helps keep new cases coming. Now then, shall we begin? Tommy Beresford had always believed that a quiet afternoon could turn treacherous without the slightest warning, but even he hadn't expected the betrayal to come from a teacup. The Laurels was unusually still that day, Albert humming in the kitchen, Tuppence rearranging the sitting room cushions with the triumphant energy of a general preparing for battle, and Tommy himself wrestling with the modest tea service like a man determined to achieve respectability. He placed the newest cup, a delicate white and blue piece Tuppence had ordered on a whim, onto the tray and heard a sharp, peculiar sound. Not a normal clink, a purposeful one. Tommy cocked his head, pausing. The peculiar sound of the teacup's edge tapping against the saucer had stirred something in him, a fleeting memory of a time when small things, like the wrong teacup, had sparked trouble. He lifted the teacup, and the thin fold of paper peeked out from beneath the saucer like a shy but suspicious creature. It didn't belong. Before he could ponder it further, a familiar voice chimed behind him. "What have you broken now, darling?" Tuppence strode in, blonde hair bright, eyes sharp. She always managed to look as though adventure had personally embroidered her outfit that morning. Tommy lifted the folded paper. Not broken, but possibly found. "Oh, splendid." Tuppence plucked it from his fingers like a magician revealing her next trick. With one brisk motion she opened it. Her expression, normally animated even in boredom, tightened into quiet, focused alarm. "Tommy." "Yes?" "Read." He did. 5 words waited on the paper, each one cold and unforgiving. "You chose the wrong friend." Tommy let out a low whistle. "Well, that's not very neighbourly." Tuppence frowned deeply. "This handwriting isn't familiar, and the teacup wasn't supposed to arrive until tomorrow. Someone went to the trouble of having it delivered today instead." She held the note up to the light. "This is intentional." Tommy barely had time to open his mouth when the doorbell sounded. A firm, brisk ring. No nonsense, no hesitation. Albert hurried past, smoothing his apron, his face tight with the unease that had been gnawing at him since the first sign of trouble. Moments later he returned, escorting a thin, pale man who stepped into the sitting room with the wary air of someone checking exits before greetings. "Mr. Pierce," Tommy said cheerfully, "just in time for tea." That false cheer evaporated the moment Pierce's eyes landed on the new teacup. The blood drained from his face as his eyes locked onto the teacup. His mouth opened, but no words came out. He staggered back a step, his breathing shallow. This wasn't just a surprise, it was a jarring reminder of a time he thought he had left behind. "Where did you get that?" he asked, voice tight, strained. Tuppence answered, "A delivery this morning, unscheduled." Pierce's gaze flickered to the ledger in Tommy's hand, and a pale, almost imperceptible shudder ran through him. His eyes were wide, realizing what was unfolding. "You see," he rasped, "Hale never forgives a mistake, not even his own." Albert re-entered carrying the tea tray, and promptly dropped a plate when Pierce turned suddenly to look at him. The crash echoed loudly. Albert muttered apologies while Tuppence's eyes narrowed at Pierce's reaction. Tommy motioned Pierce to sit. "You look like you've seen a ghost." "Not a ghost," Pierce whispered. "A reminder." "Of what?" Tuppence asked. Pierce ignored the tea, he ignored everything except the teacup. "During the war," he said, "there were arrangements. People we relied upon, people we assumed were trustworthy." He hesitated. "Some were not." Tuppence slid the folded note to him. He read it. His hands shook harder. "Oh no," he murmured, "not again." Albert set the remaining cups on the table with care that suggested he was attempting not to breathe too loudly. His eyes darted between Pierce and the ominous teacup. Pierce abruptly stood and crossed to the window. "Someone has been here," Albert sputtered. "Sir, no one has been near this house except the grocer." Pierce shook his head. "They wouldn't be seen. They're watching me. And now—" His eyes flicked toward Tommy and Tuppence. "Now they'll watch you." "Who?" Tommy demanded. Pierce pressed his forehead briefly to the cold window pane. "I thought I could end this quietly, but they're already close." "Sit down and explain," Tuppence insisted. But Pierce backed away from her, tension sparking off him like static. "I should never have come here. I've put you in danger." He reached for his coat. "I have to leave." Tommy blocked the doorway. "Pierce, running blindly won't solve anything." "I don't have a choice," Pierce's voice cracked. "I need to put something right before they get to me." Tuppence crossed the room swiftly, her expression fierce. "Who is they?" But in one frantic movement, Pierce brushed past Tommy, yanked open the door, and stumbled into the street. Tommy grabbed his own coat. "We're following him." "Obviously," Tuppence replied, snatching hers. Albert wrung his hands. "Madam, sir, should I prepare the police?" "No," Tuppence said firmly. "Lock the doors. Don't open them for anyone except us." Albert nodded gravely. Tommy and Tuppence hurried outside. No ominous fog, no dramatic wind, just a perfectly ordinary London afternoon, strikingly at odds with Pierce's panic. He was already half a block ahead, weaving through pedestrians with an anxiety that smelled of old secrets resurfacing. "Poor devil's terrified," Tommy murmured. "And terrified men lead to interesting places," Tuppence replied. "Come on." They rounded the corner just as Pierce turned down a quieter street. He kept glancing over his shoulder, flinching at passing bicycles, stiffening whenever footsteps quickened behind him. "That's not a man afraid of being embarrassed," Tuppence observed. "That's a man afraid of being caught." Tommy nodded. "And that note, you chose the wrong friend. That wasn't meant for us. It was meant for him." "Or," Tuppence countered, "it was meant for whoever received the teacup, which means the sender either made a mistake or knows exactly what they're doing," Tommy finished. Up ahead, Pierce stumbled to a halt outside a townhouse with neatly trimmed hedges and shuttered windows. He glanced back again, eyes wild. Tommy slowed. "What's he doing?" Before Tuppence could answer, the front door of the townhouse opened. Not creaked. Opened. Swiftly. Quietly. Two unseen hands yanked Pierce inside. The door slammed shut. Tuppence froze. "Tommy, did you—" "Yes," he said grimly. "I saw." For a moment neither moved. Then Tuppence lifted her chin. "Right. We're not leaving until we find out what just happened." Tommy stepped toward the townhouse gate. "Agreed." But before they could reach it, a curtain on the second floor twitched. An elderly woman peered out, wide-eyed. Simultaneously, across the street, a young man leaned from his window, watching. Two witnesses, two perspectives, two different truths waiting to be revealed. And somewhere behind that door, Pierce was disappearing into a mystery that had clearly begun long before this teacup arrived at the Laurels. Tommy exhaled slowly. "Well, Tuppence, it appears we've stumbled onto something rather serious." Tuppence's eyes gleamed, not with excitement, but with that particular brand of determined curiosity that meant trouble wouldn't be far behind. "Good," she said, "because I am in the mood for a challenge." They walked toward the house together, unaware that the tiny note beneath the teacup had just opened the first door in a labyrinth neither of them had meant to enter. And behind them, unseen, a shadow shifted. Someone else was watching. Back at the Laurels, the air felt different, charged in a way that didn't belong to a warm sitting room with orderly shelves and polished brass. Tuppence marched straight to the table and placed Pierce's forgotten hat at its centre, like a relic from some battlefield that had followed them home. Tommy closed the door behind them and double-checked the lock, though he pretended it was merely habit. They both knew better. "Right," Tuppence said. "Before Pierce dashed out like a man pursued by all 7 deadly sins, he left us this." The hat was unremarkable at first glance, dark felt, slightly worn. But its weight, its timing, its owner's panic, nothing about it was ordinary. Tommy turned it over while Tuppence fetched her small sewing kit. She held out a pair of delicate silver scissors. "Shall we?" she asked. "If you don't," Tommy replied, "you'll only keep me awake with speculating." Tuppence made a neat incision along the inner lining. The stitching was suspiciously new, done by someone with hurried hands. As she pried the lining open with the precision of a practiced investigator, something small and metallic slid free and clinked onto the table. It was a tiny silver token, round, slightly tarnished, engraved with a date and a symbol Tommy hadn't seen in years, a compass rose surrounded by a ring of minute markings like points on a secret map. Tuppence drew in a breath. "Tommy, does this mean anything to you?" He sat slowly, as if lowering himself into a memory he'd rather not revisit. "It's from Unit 17. Tuppence frowned. "Unit 17? But that group was disbanded before the end of the war." "For good reason," Tommy said. "Their whole purpose was misdirection, false identities, infiltration, manufactured loyalties. They could make a friend out of an enemy, and an enemy out of a friend with one forged signature." He picked up the token, turning it thoughtfully. Pierce was never officially part of them, but he worked adjacent, close enough to know names he wasn't supposed to know. "And close enough," Tuppence said slowly, "to be very inconvenient to someone who wants old ghosts kept buried." Tommy nodded grimly. Before they could continue, a soft, hesitant tapping came from the kitchen door. Not the front, the back. The door no one used unless they wanted to avoid being seen. Tommy exchanged a look with Tuppence. "Albert?" she called. A worried voice floated back. "Not me, madam." The tapping came again. 3 quick taps, a pause, then 2 more. Tuppence moved to the kitchen with Tommy just behind her. She unlatched the door with controlled caution. An elderly woman stood outside, wrapped in a shawl too thin for the evening. Her silver hair was wispy, her eyes watery and frightened. She had clearly walked a long way. "You? It's you," she breathed. "Thank heavens, I had to warn someone." Tuppence guided her inside. "Sit down, dear. You look frozen." The woman sat shakily, gripping her shawl. "Pierce, he's in terrible trouble. They think he talked." "Who thinks?" Tommy asked. She shook her head vigorously. "I can't say their name. No one says their name. They're always changing hands, changing faces, changing houses." Tuppence exchanged a sharp glance with Tommy. "Which house?" she asked. The woman licked her lips nervously. "The townhouse, the one he was dragged into. It doesn't belong to the same people for more than a month. Strangers come and go only at dusk. They never stay long. One of them carries the weight of many broken promises." Her voice trembled at the memory. Tommy leaned forward. "You saw Pierce taken?" "I saw them pull him inside. I screamed, but no one heard. They never do." She clutched Tuppence's sleeve. "You mustn't trust what they show you. They can make a house look lived in or abandoned in a day. They can make a friend look like an enemy." Tuppence felt a slow chill trace her spine. The woman swallowed hard. Pierce wasn't the one who chose the wrong friend. Tommy stiffened. The woman's voice dropped to a whisper. "You were." And before they could ask a single question, she bolted from the chair, darted through the door, and disappeared into the night with surprising speed. Tuppence stood frozen for a moment, then straightened her shoulders. "Tommy, we're not being intimidated by hints and shadows. This is deliberate, and we're going to find out why." Tommy looked at the token in his hand once more. A compass rose, a date, a warning, and now a threat aimed squarely at them. "It appears," he murmured, "that Unit 17 is not as dead as we hoped." Tuppence placed both hands on the kitchen table, leaning forward as though bracing herself against an invisible gust. "Tommy, everything about this reeks of orchestration. Pierce doesn't panic easily. That hat wasn't forgotten. It was meant for us. And that woman showing up minutes after we return, she didn't wander by coincidence." "No," Tommy agreed. "She came because someone wanted her to, or because someone wanted her gone." He tapped the token with his finger. "This isn't just a symbol, it's a message. Unit 17 never used anything without meaning." Tuppence crossed her arms, and a thoughtful silence settled between them. Outside, the faint crunch of distant footsteps echoed along the street, not sinister on their own, but strangely pointed in the charged atmosphere, now hovering inside the laurels. She lifted the token and studied the compass rose, running her thumb over its engraved edges. "The date," she murmured. "This one here. Does it correspond to anything? A mission? A betrayal? A cover identity?" Tommy shook his head. "I can't recall, but Unit 17 kept records, coded ones, hidden in places difficult to reach and even harder to decipher." "And Pierce had access to those records," Tuppence added, "or at least enough fragments of them to piece together something dangerous." Tommy nodded slowly. "Something someone desperately wants silenced." Tuppence set the token down. "Then Pierce is in far more trouble than he knows, and we appear to be in the way." Before Tommy could respond, a sharp scraping sound came from outside the kitchen door. Not tapping this time, not hesitant, Something dragged lightly across the wood, the slow, deliberate sound of someone testing its surface with a fingertip or perhaps a gloved hand. Tuppence motioned for silence. Tommy moved quietly toward the door, listening. There were no voices, no whispers, just that faint, unsettling scrape. Then it stopped. Footsteps retreated, and then nothing but stillness. Tommy exhaled. "We're being watched," Tuppence replied calmly. "Well, let them watch. We're not stopping." They returned to the sitting room with renewed purpose. Tommy lit a lamp, its warm glow pushing back the edges of the unknown with a comforting defiance. Tuppence sat opposite him, jotting quick notes in her small leather-bound notebook. "Let's line things up," she said. 1. Pierce arrives in a panic. 2. He recognizes the teacup pattern. 3. He flees. 4. He's dragged into that townhouse. 5. An elderly woman warns us that the house changes hands constantly and that someone carries the weight of broken promises. Tommy raised an eyebrow. 6. We apparently chose the wrong friend. Tuppence smirked faintly, which suggests we also chose the right enemy. He nodded. And that enemy knows our movements well enough to plant a message in a teacup and send a witness straight to our kitchen door. Tuppence leaned back, thoughtful. "Tommy, this is no simple matter of wartime secrets resurfacing. This is coordinated, intentional." She tapped the token. "This was placed in Pierce's hat for us to find." "And the message under the teacup?" Tommy asked. "A warning," she decided, "or a challenge." Tommy studied her expression. "We're walking straight into the middle of someone else's conspiracy." "Possibly," Tuppence replied, "but I refuse to be treated like a pawn in someone else's game. If Unit 17 still exists in some shadowy form, we're going to drag its secrets into the light." Tommy smiled slightly. "I've always admired your optimism." Tuppence corrected him. "Not optimism, determination." She stood abruptly, fetched her coat, and returned to the table. "First thing tomorrow, we investigate that townhouse again. Someone there knows where Pierce was taken, and someone there is terrified enough to send messengers to our home." Tommy placed the token in his pocket. "And tonight?" "Tonight," Tuppence said, extinguishing the lamp, "we stay alert." The Laurels settled into a watchful quiet as they prepared for a sleepless night. Outside, the street looked peaceful, innocent even, but they no longer trusted appearances. Somewhere beyond the neat row of hedges and polite doorsteps, figures moved in silence. Somewhere in the web of London's back streets, Pierce was trapped with secrets that had resurfaced after too many years of burial. And somewhere, unseen, the architect of the warning, "You chose the wrong friend," was waiting to see how Tommy and Tuppence would respond. Tuppence glanced once more at the kitchen door before heading upstairs. "We're not afraid," she murmured. "We're ready." Tommy had seen strange things in London, but nothing quite as strange as a house that changed its entire personality overnight. When he and Tuppence reached the street in daylight, the townhouse where Pierce had vanished looked as though nothing, absolutely nothing, had ever happened inside it. Tuppence stared, jaw tight. "Tommy, this can't be the same house." "Oh, it's the same address," Tommy said, stepping closer. "But the house, it's as if someone erased its memory." Gone were the curtains, the rugs, the coat stand near the hall. Every trace of life had evaporated. The windows stared blankly, unadorned, not even a curtain ring left behind. Not a scrap of newspaper, not a forgotten boot, not even dust disturbed by hurried feet. Tuppence tried the door. It yielded instantly. Inside, the emptiness was worse. The wallpaper had been stripped in places, fixtures removed. A hollow smell clung to the air, like a place that had been abandoned for months, not mere hours. Sunlight pooled across the bare floorboards, revealing faint drag marks, thin grooves where furniture or something heavier had been pulled across the room. Tommy knelt. Someone moved something in a hurry, or someone. Tuppence followed the tracks with her eyes, then froze at the radiator. Wait, something stuck there. She reached behind it and pulled out a scrap of paper. On it lay the now familiar symbol. The compass rose, tiny but unmistakable. "Unit 17 again," Tommy murmured. "This is being staged," Tuppence declared. "Piece by piece, clue by clue, someone wants us following this trail. Or wants us to believe we are," Tommy countered. Before she could reply, a voice called from above. "Is someone there?" Tuppence looked up to see the old woman from the previous night peering from her window across the street. "You shouldn't go inside," she cried. "No one's lived there in a week." A second window flew open from the opposite side, where a young man leaned out. "Nonsense. There was a dinner party here last night. Music going until midnight. Annoying racket." Tuppence exchanged a slow, deliberate look with Tommy. "Contradictions," she whispered. "Too many." Tommy stepped outside. "Excuse me, did either of you see someone brought into this house last night? A thin man, older, anxious." The old woman nodded vigorously. "Yes, dragged inside. I saw it." The young man scoffed. "Dragged? No one's dragged anywhere. I didn't see anyone." Tuppence folded her arms. "Either one of them is lying, or both are being fed false impressions." Tommy glanced back toward the townhouse. "This is deliberate, misdirection, controlled perception." Across the street, halfway down the pavement, a man in a long dark coat stood watching them, not pretending to read a newspaper, not feigning interest in the scenery. He simply watched. Tuppence's tone sharpened. "Tommy, there." He followed her gaze. The man noticed and turned away, walking with casual confidence. Not too fast, not too slow. The gait of someone trained not to appear conspicuous. Tommy started after him. "Hey, you there!" But the man slipped around the corner. When Tommy reached the corner, the pavement was empty. No footsteps, no door closing, no carriage pulling away, just absence where presence had been moments before. "He vanished," Tommy muttered. Tuppence caught up with him, not out of breath in the slightest. "Another test," she said. "Another piece of theatre meant for us." Tommy exhaled. The house, the witnesses, the scrap with the compass rose, that man in the coat, all arranged like scenery on a stage. "And we," Tuppence said grimly, "are the audience they want." She looked once more at the hollow house behind them, sunlight streaming through its bare windows like a spotlight on an empty set. "Someone," she murmured, "is controlling the narrative. They decide what we see, what we hear, and when we arrive." Tommy adjusted his tie, an unconscious gesture he always made before stepping deeper into trouble. "Well," he said quietly, "if they think they're directing us, they're in for a shock." Tuppence smiled. "Because we don't follow scripts." They walked away from the townhouse, its emptiness lingering behind them like a deliberate gap in the story, one someone clearly wanted them to notice. But now they were watching the watcher, and that changed everything. Tommy stood at the sitting room table with the paper scrap flattened beneath his palms, the faint compass rose emblem staring up at him like an accusation. Tuppence hovered beside him, arms crossed, tapping her fingers against her sleeve in quick, sharp bursts of thought. The scrap had been torn deliberately, its edges ragged, as if someone had meant to give only part of a message, just enough to pull them into the next step. "It's not merely a symbol," Tommy said quietly. "It's an indicator." "Of what?" Tuppence asked. "A cipher key." He reached for his old field notebook, flipping to a page marked with near-forgotten wartime shorthand. Tuppence leaned closer as he set the compass rose beside the margin, aligning its points with penciled annotations from years ago. Slowly, the pattern began to reveal itself, not as a drawing, but as a code. Tuppence exhaled. "It's a map." "A partial one," Tommy corrected. But 3 small, faint markings stood out, dots positioned with intention. Tuppence fetched a proper London map and laid it beneath the scrap. When Tommy overlaid the paper like a transparency, the dots matched 3 locations: an old warehouse in Southwark, a quiet mews near Kensington, and a decommissioned postal office in Clerkenwell. 3 places, Tuppence murmured. 3 old secrets. Tommy nodded grimly. Each one tied to a breach in wartime intelligence, cases where someone fed false identities or misinformation to the wrong side. Tuppence studied him. "Tommy, this wasn't random. These are connected to you." He hesitated, then stepped back from the table with a heaviness she rarely saw in him. "There was a case," he admitted. "Late in the war, a fellow agent, Martin Hale. He received falsified instructions before a mission in France. He walked into a trap, never came back." Tuppence softened. "You never told me there was doubt about the source." "There was always doubt." Tommy's voice lowered. One of us had passed on the wrong orders. By accident, or deliberately, no one ever proved who. The case was shelved when the war ended. "And Pierce?" Tuppence asked gently. Tommy closed his eyes for a moment. He was on the periphery, close enough that some suspected him, but nothing ever stuck. "Nothing stuck," Tuppence echoed, "because no one bothered to examine the truth. They simply let suspicion follow him like a shadow." Tommy rubbed the bridge of his nose. The message under the teacup, the compass rose, the townhouse, it all points back to Unit 17, and to the ghost of that old betrayal. Tuppence rested a hand on his arm. "There's something else. Whoever is orchestrating this wants you unsettled. They want Pierce cornered. They want us chasing ghosts instead of answers." She returned her attention to the map. "But ghosts don't plant clues in hats or drag men into townhouses. Someone living is pulling the strings." Tommy nodded slowly. "And someone wants us to believe the traitor from years ago is back. Or," Tuppence said sharply, "that the traitor was never caught." Silence settled for a moment, thick with the weight of old grievances and unhealed wounds. Tuppence broke it first. "Tommy, how many people from your unit knew about these 3 locations?" "Not many, maybe 5. Pierce, certainly. Hale, 2 officers whose names I'd rather not say unless we must. And 1 other." "Who?" Tommy hesitated. "Someone who knew how to vanish. Someone who specialized in erasing evidence and rearranging scenes, much like that townhouse." Tuppence's eyes sharpened. "Then that person is either dead or very much alive and playing games." She traced the 3 locations with her fingertip. "These are not ordinary places. They're anchor points, spots where false identities were stored, tested, or created. Someone with access to that system could manipulate witnesses, switch out residents, plant or erase traces of habitation overnight." Tommy nodded grimly. "Exactly what we saw today." Tuppence straightened, determination settling over her like armor. "Then we visit them, all 3. "Tonight?" Tommy asked. "Tonight we plan," she corrected. "Tomorrow we go." Tommy folded the paper scrap. "And what are we hoping to find?" "Anything," Tuppence replied. "A name, a memory, a record someone failed to burn properly. Whoever dragged Pierce away left us this trail for a reason, either to warn us or to frame someone else." She turned to him. "And if Pierce was the wrong friend, Tommy, then who was the right one?" Tommy didn't answer. He didn't need to. The 3 marked points on the map seemed to glow faintly in the lamplight, like 3 doors opening into the darkest corners of their past. Tomorrow, they would step through each one. Brixton was already stirring when Tommy and Tuppence stepped off the tram, its streets bustling with shopkeepers pulling up shutters and children zigzagging between errands. But the little stationery shop they sought, Coldham's, looked as though it had woken reluctantly, its windows dim, its sign faded to a sigh. A bell tinkled when they entered, sounding like a weary confession. Stacks of envelopes, ribbons and ink pots crowded every corner. The air smelled of old paper and lavender polish. And behind the counter, like a vulture presiding over decaying correspondence, stood Mr. Coldham. He was tall and angular, with spectacles perched so precariously on his nose, one expected them to dive off at any moment. Behind him were countless labelled drawers, letters unsent 1920, letters misplaced 1933, letters returned by fate. Tuppence smiled warmly. "Mr. Coldham, we're looking for information about a letter posted by a Mr. Pierce." Coldham stiffened. "Pierce? First name Victor?" Tommy and Tuppence exchanged a glance. "Yes," Tommy said. "You know him?" "Temporarily," Coldham sniffed, disappearing behind a cabinet. "Pierce is one of those fellows who understands the value of things not delivered." He opened a drawer marked "You Unposted Requests." "He mailed me something 2 days ago." "Why you?" Tuppence asked. Coldham wagged a long finger. "Because I am the keeper of unsent words, the custodian of messages meant for some day." He selected a small envelope. "This arrived with special instructions." Tommy stepped closer. "What kind?" Coldham's voice lowered theatrically. "I was told to safeguard anything meant for TNT." Tuppence blinked. "TNT, as in Tommy and Tuppence," Tommy finished grimly. Coldham handed over the envelope. It was unremarkable. Plain, slightly creased, sealed with no wax or flourish, but something about its softness, its quiet weight, unsettled Tuppence. "There's no signature," Colden warned, but the message inside was short, very short. Tuppence broke the seal. Inside, a slip of paper read, "Trust only what can't be moved." Tommy felt the words like a chill. That sounds like Pierce. Cryptic, urgent, always trying to say more than he dared. Colden cleared his throat. "You should also know, someone else asked after the same letter." Tuppence tensed. "Who?" "A woman," he said. Polished, grey dress, gloves, veil, never lifted her eyes. Tommy exchanged a look with Tuppence. "The woman from the street," Colden nodded. She inquired twice, very politely, very firmly. He shuddered. "I told her nothing, naturally. I don't deal in trust lightly." Tuppence leaned on the counter. "Did she say whom she represented?" "Not a word," he whispered, but she carried herself like someone accustomed to secrets and to being obeyed. Tommy pocketed the letter. "Thank you, Mr. Colden. You may have helped save a life." Colden gave a thin smile. "That is more responsibility than I enjoy. Please don't tell me if it happens again." As they stepped outside, the bustle of Brixton seemed sharper, more alert. Tuppence clutched Tommy's arm. "Tommy, this is a warning." "Pierce wants us to trust only fixed things," Tommy said. "Objects, places, records that can't be altered or rearranged like that townhouse. A clue left in a hat, a scrap in a radiator, a letter handed to a stationary hermit." Tuppence shook her head. "He's leaving us a trail, but the woman in grey is following the same trail." Tommy glanced down the street. "She may be watching us right now." As if summoned by his words, a taxi paused near the curb. A silhouette appeared behind its window, motionless, observing. Before Tommy could step forward, the taxi sped off. Tuppence exhaled. "They're growing bolder." "Or," Tommy corrected, "we're getting closer to something they desperately want hidden." They walked briskly toward the main road, weaving through crowds. Tommy felt eyes on them, never certain, always possible. He tightened his grip around the letter. "We mustn't go straight home," Tuppence whispered. "If they're waiting, they'll expect that." "We'll take the long way," Tommy said. "Circle twice, change trams." "And if they still follow?" she asked. Tommy gave a wry half-smile. "Then at least we'll know for certain." By the time they reached a quieter corner, Tuppence stopped abruptly. "Tommy." He followed her gaze. Across the street, half hidden in the shadow of a tobacconist's awning, stood the woman in grey. She didn't approach. She didn't move. She simply watched. Tuppence lowered her voice. "She knows we have the letter." The woman inclined her head, almost politely, then stepped backward into a passing crowd until she dissolved entirely. Tommy swallowed. "She's not working alone." "No," Tuppence agreed, gripping his hand, "but neither are we." They hurried on, two figures moving through London with secrets rising around them like invisible fog. Somewhere, Pierce was counting on them. Somewhere, truth waited at the next turn. And somewhere, the woman in grey was already planning her next move. The near miss came so suddenly that Tommy barely had time to yank Tuppence back. A taxi screeched across the pavement, tyres skidding, its bumper brushing Tommy's coat by inches. Pedestrians shouted. A dog barked indignantly. And then, as though staged with theatrical precision, the taxi door swung open. Inside sat the woman in grey, still veiled, still immaculate, still unnervingly calm. "Mr. Beresford, Mrs. Beresford," she said in a voice smooth enough to be rehearsed, "do forgive the abrupt manner of arrival, but we must speak." Tuppence stepped in front of Tommy. "You nearly killed us." "My apologies," the woman replied with the faintest inclination of her head. "Time is short, and your safety, strangely enough, depends on efficiency." Her voice was calm, unnervingly so, as she stretched her gloved hand toward them. "The envelope, if you please. Once it is in my possession, your danger will lessen considerably," she purred, though the weight of her words hung heavy in the air like the tip of a blade. "And if we don't comply?" Tuppence asked, her eyes narrowing. "Then," the woman's gaze turned colder, "I'll have to reconsider my options." Tommy glanced at the driver. The man's face was pale, drenched in sweat. His knuckles clenched the steering wheel as though he feared letting go. Not the demeanour of a criminal, the demeanour of a hostage. "Tommy," Tuppence murmured without looking away from the woman, "the driver isn't working with her. He's afraid of her." The woman sighed as if disappointed by their perceptiveness. "The envelope, Mrs. Beresford. You cannot possibly understand the trouble it represents." "That's precisely why we're keeping it," Tuppence said crisply. The woman tilted her head. "Stubbornness is admirable in small quantities, deadly in large ones." Tommy stepped forward. "If you intend to threaten us—" "Oh no," she interrupted smoothly. "Threats are crude. I offer protection. There are forces moving around you that would gladly remove you from this little game. I, however, prefer to keep my options intact." Her voice dropped lower. "Give me the letter, and I can ensure your continued existence." "That," Tuppence said, "sounds very much like a threat." The woman leaned back in her seat. "I suppose one could interpret it so." Before the tension could tighten further, a loud cry erupted down the pavement. A man, a passer-by, collapsed near the curb, clutching his chest. People rushed to him at once. A crowd formed in seconds. Tuppence looked toward the commotion for only an instant. It was enough. When she turned back, the taxi was already reversing. The woman in grey watched them silently from behind her veil, never breaking eye contact, not even as the taxi swerved into traffic and vanished. Tommy exhaled. "We've just failed to keep up with the world's politest menace." Tuppence patted his arm. "Never mind that. She wanted the letter. That's reason enough to read it immediately." They hurried into a small side street, shielded from prying eyes, and Tommy unfolded the envelope from Mr. Coldham. Inside lay a single sheet of paper with neat, precise handwriting. No greeting, no preamble, just a name, Jonathan Hale. Jonathan's. Tuppence frowned. Hale. Wasn't he the agent who, presumed dead 10 years ago? Tommy finished, his voice tightening. He vanished after the failed mission in France, the one compromised by falsified orders. Tuppence scanned the rest of the letter. Only one more line followed the name. He is alive. He is hunting the friend he failed to kill. Tommy felt the coldness of the words settle into his bones. "Good Lord," Tuppence whispered. "Pierce." Tommy nodded. "Pierce didn't betray Unit 17. He survived Hale. Hale must believe Pierce exposed him, or that Pierce knows the truth. Which means," Tuppence added grimly, "that Hale is eliminating anyone connected to that operation, and Pierce is his unfinished business." Tommy folded the paper slowly. "And now, us." A quiet moment passed, filled only by the distant rumble of buses and street chatter. But beneath it, an unmistakable shift, a sense that the boundaries of the game had moved again. Tuppence stood straighter. "Tommy, this letter wasn't meant to frighten us. It was meant to prepare us." "For what?" Tommy asked. "For the fact that Hale is not merely alive. He's ahead of us." Tommy touched her elbow. "We need to alert Albert, gather our information, and choose our next steps very carefully." "Yes, carefully." Tuppence's eyes shone with a spark that had nothing to do with fear. "But not timidly. If Hale thinks he can hunt us, he's in for a dreadful surprise." They stepped out of the narrow street and rejoined the flow of London life, blending back into crowds, the city unaware that 2 amateur sleuths were now carrying a secret that could topple men who had once hidden behind forged names, orchestrated betrayals, and shadows cast by war. Somewhere, Hale was watching. Somewhere the woman in grey was planning. And somewhere Pierce was either still alive or running out of time. Tuppence glanced at Tommy. "We're not prey, darling." Tommy smiled faintly. "No, we're the ones who turn the tables." They walked on with purpose, the letter tucked safely away, but the danger now circling closer than ever. The second point on the map led Tommy and Tuppence far from the crowded hum of central London, past rows of warehouses whose windows stared blankly at the grey sky. The outskirts had a peculiar stillness, broken only by the distant grind of lorries and the occasional caw of a stray crow. It was the kind of place where secrets could be stored and forgotten without fuss. "This is it," Tommy murmured, stopping before a derelict structure with peeling paint and boarded windows. "This was once one of Unit 17's safe houses." "It looks like it hasn't been touched since the war," Tuppence said. "Appearances," Tommy reminded her, "are the favourite disguise of dangerous men." The front door gave way with a reluctant groan. Inside, dust lay thick on long unused furniture, but not everywhere. Near the hearth, ashes formed a small mound, grey but not cold. Tuppence touched the remnants gently. Still warm. And someone burned something. Tommy picked up a charred fragment of paper from the grate, but it disintegrated instantly. Tuppence scanned the dim room. Look. A candle stub sat on a metal plate, its wick freshly melted. The faint scent of wax still lingered. Someone had been here within the hour. They moved cautiously, their footsteps quiet against the wooden floor. A desk in the corner held a scattering of objects, a cracked glass, a rusted penknife, and, most damning of all, a half-burned photograph. Tuppence lifted it. 5 men stared back from the faded image, Pierce, Hale, and 3 others. Tommy felt a sinking sensation. This was taken during infiltration training, before the Hale mission. Tuppence pointed at the edges of the photograph, burn marks that hadn't completely consumed the faces. Someone wanted this destroyed, but not well enough. Next to the photograph lay a folded page. Tommy opened it. A list of names, some checked off, some crossed out. Pierce's name had been circled twice. Tuppence frowned. A kill list? Or a fear list, Tommy muttered. Either way, Pierce is at the centre. They pushed deeper into the safe house. Tommy found a door leading to the cellar. Torch? Tuppence asked. Tommy switched one on, revealing a steep flight of steps descending into shadow. They entered carefully. The cellar smelled of damp brick, old coal, and something faintly metallic. Fear, perhaps, or memory turned sour. Shelves lined the walls, some empty, some holding rusted tins and old crates. Then Tuppence froze. Tommy, we're not alone. A figure stood in the far corner, half hidden by darkness. The man from the street, the Watcher. His posture was tense but not aggressive. He raised his hand slightly, palms visible. Don't shout, he said quietly. I'm here to help. Tommy kept his stance firm, protective. You've been following us. Yes, the man said. Because Hale is closer than you think. Tuppence stepped forward. Who are you? A friend of Pierce, he said, voice taut. And of yours, whether you know it or not. Hale thinks Pierce betrayed him. He's wrong. Someone else fed the false orders. Hale never forgives mistakes, and he calls betrayal a mistake. Tommy exchanged a quick look with Tuppence. You were in Unit 17? The man nodded. I knew Hale, knew what he was capable of. That safe house upstairs, he gestured. He used it last night. He's hunting down everyone who was near that mission. You're on the list now. Tuppence tightened her jaw. Where is he now? The man opened his mouth to answer. A sharp crack exploded through the cellar. Glass shattered. The man jerked violently as a bullet punched through the small window behind him and struck his shoulder. No, his chest. He collapsed instantly. Down! Tommy pulled Tuppence to the floor as a second bullet ripped through the window frame. Silence. No running footsteps. No car engine. Just the echo of violence and the soft, wet sound of the Watcher struggling to breathe. Tommy crawled toward him. Stay with us. Who shot you? Where's Hale? The Watcher's eyes opened, glazed but desperate. He managed only 2 words. Behind. You. Tommy twisted around, torch beams sweeping the dark cellar doorway. Nothing, but the hairs on his neck rose. Someone had been there, someone close enough to see them, close enough to hear them. Tuppence gripped his arm. Tommy, we have to leave. Now. He nodded. Together they half ran, half climbed the cellar steps, emerging into the abandoned safe house with adrenaline pulling them forward. Outside, the street lay empty, utterly, unnervingly empty. No shooter, no movement, no witness. Only the fading scent of candle wax and the still warm ashes of a fire someone had tried to erase. Tuppence looked back at the safe house, her expression steady, resolute. Tommy, Hale isn't a ghost. No, Tommy said softly. He is worse than a ghost. He pocketed the list of names, feeling its weight like a countdown. He's a man who shouldn't exist. And yet, he existed, closer than ever. Tommy and Tuppence slipped down the quiet side streets, their coats pulled tight, faces partially obscured under hats and scarves. London in the late afternoon had the usual bustle, but each shadow seemed to lengthen with menace, each passer-by a potential witness, Or worse, they had planned to approach the Laurels cautiously, expecting nothing more than a quiet homecoming. What they found instead jolted them into immediate alert. Albert stood in the doorway, his frame rigid, a cricket bat clutched in both hands like a scepter of defiance. His spectacles reflected the low sun with a sharp glint, and his mouth was a thin line of determination. "Don't even think of stepping inside without explaining," he said, voice tight. "Phone call came an hour ago. They want the compass pieces. Said they'd come themselves if I didn't comply." Tuppence's eyes widened. "Albert, you've been holding the fort like a seasoned guard." He puffed out his chest. "I'm not letting anyone near your precious artifacts. Not on my watch." Tommy raised his hands in mock surrender, but the tight corners of his mouth betrayed his unease. "Albert, Tuppence cut in, energetic as ever. "We have a full explanation. Everything." She ushered him inside quickly, out of the line of sight from the street. Once inside, they laid the tokens, scraps, and letters before Albert. He leaned over the table, eyebrows climbing with each new revelation. He shook his head in mock despair. "So much for a quiet evening, eh? Threatening letters, secret maps, women in veils, and now Pierce is apparently in mortal danger. Typical day for you two, I suppose." Tommy couldn't help a wry grin. "Not exactly cricket, Albert." Albert's face twitched with humour and horror at once. "Cricket? This is war, and here I am, defending a house with a bat." Tuppence gave him a sharp look. "Well, it seems you're indispensable." Her glance softened. "Thank you, Albert." His smile cracked briefly. "I am aware, but don't let this become routine." Tommy's fingers rifled through Pierce's forgotten hat, and something slipped from between the lining. A small slip of paper, trembling in his hand as though aware of its own importance. Tuppence leaned over. "I thought we'd searched everything." Tommy unfolded it carefully. The handwriting was hesitant, faintly smudged. "If they take me, tell them I chose the wrong friend. The right one was you." A hush fell. Even Albert stopped his muttered quips, staring at the paper as though it were a ghost. "That," Tuppence whispered, "changes everything." Tommy nodded. "Pierce. He knew this could happen, and he trusted us to carry the message forward. He believed we were the right friend." Albert cleared his throat. "And what precisely am I supposed to do with all this sentimentality? Guard you more, or the letter?" Tuppence smiled faintly. "Both. Definitely both." A sudden flutter of movement caught their eyes. Outside, in the moonlit garden, a figure appeared, veiled, delicate, yet radiating urgency. She stopped near the iron fence, hands gripping the bars. "Please," she called, "I need your protection." Tommy and Tuppence exchanged a glance, instincts on edge. Tuppence approached cautiously. "Who are you?" The woman lifted her veil, revealing eyes rimmed with worry and unmistakable intelligence. "I am Eleanor Hale," she said, voice firm but urgent. "Jonathan Hale's sister." Tommy's heart skipped. "Hale, alive, and after Pierce, and now, us?" She nodded. "Hale wants revenge on anyone connected to the mission that ruined his life. Pierce was only the first. You, and perhaps even others he deems guilty, are now targets. I beg you to protect me, and let me help you understand him." Tuppence frowned. "You're not exactly forthcoming about your own agenda. Why should we trust you?" "Because," Eleanor said, lowering her gaze, "I have my own reasons. I cannot stop him, but I can guide you. You have the advantage of knowing fragments he cannot anticipate. I offer you that advantage, freely." Tommy studied her. "And the letter?" He waved the slip of paper. "We have this. But how do we know you're not leading us into a trap?" Eleanor's eyes flashed with resolve. "Because I want him stopped as much as you do. He is clever, relentless, and believes mistakes deserve death. You will be cornered if you act alone." Tuppence folded her arms. "And Pierce, is he?" "He is alive, and in hiding. But Hale's attention moves in a circle that grows narrower every hour. He's learning, calculating. He will find the weak, the unaware, the misled." Albert, still clutching his cricket bat, muttered, "And I suppose my part is to keep watch on the misled ones, eh?" "Yes, Albert," Tuppence said firmly, "and thank you." The garden felt smaller now, each shadow elongated, each whisper of wind a messenger. Eleanor Hale's presence was both reassurance and warning. They had a guide, but also another layer of complication. How much of what she said was truth and how much was strategic disclosure? Tuppence glanced at Tommy. We're running out of time. Every minute we hesitate, Hale gets closer. Tommy tucked the letter safely into his coat. We'll take her advice cautiously, but we act. Eleanor inclined her head. Good. You'll need courage, cleverness, and perhaps luck. Tuppence placed a hand on the gate, looking out into the night. Then we will give him all three. But first, we keep Pierce's message alive. He trusted us. That's our first duty. The moon shone pale over the laurels. Shadows lengthened, and somewhere beyond the darkened hedges, Jonathan Hale's attention, sharp and focused, was circling ever nearer. Tuppence led the way through the shadows of the deserted streets, the envelope with Pierce's warning pressed against her coat. Tommy followed silently, senses taut, the map's final point, a disused underground depot, looming in his mind like a dark promise. Every instinct screamed that Hale would be waiting, but retreat was no longer an option. Too many lives teetered on the edge of ruin. The depot stood at the far edge of London, a skeletal building of corrugated iron and boarded windows. Its doors, once painted green, were now mottled with rust and dirt. Tommy tried one. It yielded with an eerie groan. Inside, the air was heavy, tinged with the scent of oil and old paper. The depot was vast, echoing with the subtle drip of water from the roof. Tuppence motioned him to follow as they moved cautiously among stacks of crates and dusty shelving. Every shadow seemed to whisper. And then, the first confirmation. Fake passports, folded and labelled, disguises laid out as if on mannequins, dossiers with photographs of every person they had encountered. Hale had been watching them for months. Every step they had taken, every letter they had received, orchestrated, monitored, controlled. A muffled sound drew them to a storage room. Tommy tried the door, locked. Tuppence's hands flew to the small toolkit she carried. A few swift maneuvers later, the lock clicked. Inside, Pierce lay slumped against a wall, barely conscious but alive. His face was pallid, bruised, but recognition lit his eyes. You made it," he rasped. Tuppence knelt beside him. "We wouldn't have come if there were any other way, Pierce. Can you move?" Pierce shook his head, voice trembling. Hale, he doesn't forgive mistakes." Before they could do more, Hale's presence made itself known. He emerged from a shadowed corner, calm, almost casual, as if stepping into a drawing room rather than a lair of horrors. His eyes were cold, precise, measuring each reaction. "Ah," he said, voice smooth. "So we meet at last. The friends, the wrong friends, all gathered." Tommy stepped forward, anger igniting his calm facade. "Hale, the inconsistencies in your story. Pierce didn't betray anyone. The mistakes you blame on him were yours." Hale's lips curled into a faint smile. "Inconsistencies," he repeated. "No, every error was a lesson, every death a lesson. And yet, you all chose poorly. You chose the wrong friend." Tuppence's gaze swept the room, files, disguises meticulously organized. Then she noticed a faint glint from behind a stack of crates, a hidden ledger. With nimble fingers she extracted it, flipping through pages filled with coded notes and annotations. And there it was, proof that Hale himself had leaked intelligence, panicked when the mission faltered, and staged the betrayal to cover his own mistakes. The death of the agent, the ruin of Pierce's reputation, all orchestrated by Hale to hide his terror-induced blunder. Tommy gestured sharply. "The truth is here, Hale. You created the lie to mask your fear." Hale's eyes flicked to the ledger, then back to Pierce. Rage rippled across his otherwise composed face. "You will pay for this," he hissed. Suddenly Hale lunged toward Pierce, intent unmistakable. But Tuppence reacted instantly, her hand landing on one of his decoy mechanisms, a tripwire designed to mislead intruders. In seconds Hale was caught, suspended awkwardly, hands trapped by his own cunning device. He thrashed, furious but immobilized. The ledger slipped from Tuppence's grip, falling at Tommy's feet, evidence secure. Pierce gasped, weakly raising a hand. "Thank you." Tuppence stood, catching her breath, eyes steady. "We were never the wrong friend, Pierce. He made that mistake himself." Hale, struggling, seethed. You You cannot escape the consequences of your own fear, Tommy said firmly, and this ledger ensures justice will be served. Sirens wailed faintly in the distance, approaching authorities alerted earlier by Albert's watchful phone call. Hale's eyes widened. The realization of capture crystallized his fury and defeat. Tuppence adjusted her gloves, surveying the room. Every disguise, every dossier, every scrap of deceit has been documented. The truth stands free now. Pierce attempted a weak smile. I owe you both, everything. Tommy placed a hand on his shoulder. No debts, just survival, and the restoration of what you never lost, your name. The depot, once a chamber of fear and secrets, now felt hollow in victory. Shadows that had stalked them were gone. Hale, trapped in his own design, had revealed the final piece. The wrong friend, the one blamed, feared, hunted, was at last identified. And it wasn't Pierce, nor was it themselves. It was Hale, ensnared by his own panic and deception. Tuppence glanced at Tommy. Well, darling, the night of broken identities is broken, finally. Tommy allowed a faint, wry smile. Indeed, and the right friend stands tall. The three, Pierce, Tuppence, and Tommy, stood together as the first headlights from the authorities swept into the depot. The nightmare that had haunted months of espionage, deception, and fear was ending. The wrong friend had been revealed, justice subtly, elegantly restored, and the city outside continued unaware of the peril that had lurked beneath its streets. The first rays of morning slid across the laurels, painting the sitting room in honeyed light. Tommy stirred from a shallow doze, alert instantly, not from sleep, but from the lingering echoes of the previous night's peril. Tuppence, already at the window, sipped a small cup of tea, eyes bright with quiet satisfaction. Pierce, pale but steady, reclined on the sofa, a blanket draped over his shoulders. He was recovering, fully cleared of suspicion, fully alive. Breakfast smells remarkably civilized for a house that has been under siege, Tuppence said, voice light, though her fingers tightened reflexively around the cup's handle. Tommy glanced around the room, noting the absence of shadows, the gentle rhythm of the clock, the faint creak of the stairs where Albert now scuttled about. Indeed, one might almost forget, he said, that a woman in grey has been orchestrating our nerves, and a madman was hunting Pierce. Pierce coughed lightly, then managed a weak smile. Thanks to both of you, I suppose my misfortune is over for now. I owe you everything. Tuppence returned his smile with a nod. You owe nothing but your own sense of perspective, Pierce, and a promise to remain out of Hale's reach. Tommy felt the weight of Pierce's final words settle over him, and the quiet realization hit. The wrong friend was never the one they'd feared. It had always been the one closest to them, hiding behind a well-crafted mask of trust. Tommy leaned back, fingers steepled. Caution, then, is never fully unneeded. The world does not forgive carelessness, even on the quietest days. Albert's voice interrupted them from the kitchen doorway. Breakfast is ready, and I assure you it is the most orderly chaos you'll see in London today. He clutched a plate of eggs and toast as though defending it from invisible marauders. Tuppence laughed softly. Albert, you are the calm in the storm, even when the storm arrives in veiled form. Pierce attempted a chuckle, wincing slightly at a bruise on his ribs. I never realized the true value of loyalty until now. Tommy's gaze swept the room, resting on the scattered notes, compass rose tokens, and letters carefully returned to their envelopes. And yet, loyalty is fickle. It can be tested, lost, and redeemed in the smallest of actions. Tuppence, eyes bright with the memory of the night's tension, added, or in the largest. And sometimes one does not even know the extent of what one's loyalty can accomplish until danger forces the matter. They ate together quietly, punctuated with Albert's occasional humorous commentary on burnt toast, the strategic positioning of the marmalade, and the proper angle to pour tea. The familiarity, the warmth, the mundane yet comforting domesticity, these were treasures in themselves after weeks of suspense, fear, and deception. Later, with breakfast concluded, Tommy carefully folded the compass rose tokens, returning them to their rightful case for the authorities. Coldham will appreciate the notice, he said, sliding the envelope toward Tuppence. Indeed, she replied, tucking a note of thanks inside. And I dare say our friend Mr. Coldham will be more relieved than most to see his meticulous care validated. The suspicious townhouse, once a locus of terror and vanished footprints, was officially tied to Hale's network of safe houses. Authorities had taken custody, ensuring that nothing remained for curious or malicious hands. The web of deception had been dismantled, one piece at a time. Tuppence glanced at Pierce, now upright and steady, and allowed a smile to touch her lips. You see, Pierce, even in London, even amid threats, there are moments of order restored. Quiet days exist, though perhaps never fully, and certainly never without the possibility of adventure looming nearby. Pierce nodded, gratitude mingling with lingering awe. You've given me more than life tonight. You've given me clarity, friendship, and faith in those I trusted. Tommy placed a hand on his shoulder. And you, Pierce, have reminded us that even the smallest acts of courage, letters sent, tokens hidden, warnings left, can alter the course of events far greater than any one of us might expect. As the morning sunlight filtered through the laurels, the house seemed to breathe again, calm and secure. Tommy, Tuppence, and Pierce shared quiet laughter, toasted Albert's indefatigable loyalty, and let the memory of danger fade into warmth. Yet beneath that warmth lingered a subtle, unspoken awareness. The world outside might be calm, the threats neutralized for now, but adventure, mischief, and peril were never truly far from Tommy and Tuppence. Even on the quietest of days, vigilance remained the truest measure of friendship.